In this video we're going to be revisiting the iPad first generation. So last week I jumped on eBay and found this iPad first generation listed for about £20, so I ended up ordering it. So in this video we're going to be revisiting the iPad first generation in 2024, and we're also going to be doing a durability test to see how durable Apple devices were back in 2010. And as always, if you do enjoy what you see, be sure to hit that subscribe button. We're on the road to 2,000 subscribers. Absolutely amazing. Let's aim for 20 likes on this video. Let's get on with it. So here we have the iPad first generation that was released in January of 2010. So that means it's over 14 years old, which is crazy because it actually still feels quite modern. And I paid only £25 for this tablet. It's actually in fairly decent condition. There's no cracks or major scratches on the screen. The only real damage with this tablet is they tried to remove an engravement from the top. So as you can see, that's been sandpapered off. But apart from that, it's actually in quite decent condition for a 14-year-old tablet. So we're going to start off by running through the specs and features of this tablet. Then we're going to have a look at the software. Then we're going to do our durability test. So this iPad was released back in January of 2010. So as I said, over 14 years ago. So this tablet was actually released a couple of months after the iPhone 3GS and before the iPhone 4. So the iPhone 4 was actually released later on in 2010. Unlike modern iPads where there's multiple different versions such as the iPad mini, the iPad Pro, the iPad Air, there was only one iPad back then, black, with a silver back and a 9.7-inch screen. The only customization you got with this iPad was the memory. So here we have the 32GB version of the iPad, but you could also get a 16 and a 64GB version. And this iPad only came with black bezels. The white bezels came later on with the iPad 2. So when you turn on this device, the first thing you notice is the bezels on this iPad are actually quite large compared to more modern iPads. My first impressions looking at the screen is it's not actually terrible. The colours look alright. One thing you do notice is the resolution isn't that good. This was rocking a 4:3 aspect ratio sub 720p screen. So this, I believe this was a 768 by 1024 pixel screen. But for 14 years old, it is actually still quite impressive. I've definitely seen worse screens. So just to give you some context of how large the pixels actually are on this iPad, this has a pixel density of 132 pixels per inch. Just for some context, the new iPhone 15 has a pixel density of 460. So as you can see, they've managed to cram 460 pixels into an inch on the new iPhone, whereas this only manages to cram 132. In terms of performance, this actually has the Apple A4 chip, which was the same processor that was in the iPhone 4. The Apple A4 chip was a single core 1 GHz processor, so by today's standards it's not a very powerful chip at all. It only had to run earlier versions of iOS, so it's still quite snappy. In terms of performance though, this did have less RAM than the iPhone 4, so the iPhone 4 had half a gigabyte of RAM. This had a quarter of a gigabyte, which meant that this was actually a less capable device than the iPhone 4, and that shows in software support. You could only upgrade this iPad first generation all the way up to iOS 5.1.1. whereas the iPhone 4 you could upgrade all the way up to iOS 7. So I was just having a look through the software that was actually supported on this iPad, and this has to be the least supported iOS device. This iPad released with iOS 4 and it was only supported up to iOS 5.1.1. So this technically only got 1 year of software support, which is actually quite terrible for an Apple device. If you compare that to newer iPhones, they have like 5 or 6 years of software support. This only had 1 year of software support. As I've already mentioned, in terms of internal storage, this particular device here has 32GB, but you could also get a 16 and a 64 variant of the iPad. So we're now going to have a look at the external features of this iPad first generation. So this iPad first generation actually features a unique design that was only ever seen on this first generation of iPad. So if you have a look at the edges of this device, they're actually flat, which is a design language that Apple have gone back to with the newer iPhones. So maybe some could say this was ahead of its time. So the whole back of this device is made out of aluminium. As you can see, the edges are actually flat, and then there is a slight convex back to this device, so it kind of curves upwards. They completely scrapped this design for the iPad 2, which had sharper corners and it was a bit slimmer, and the back was actually flat. Now in my opinion, I actually think this is a more comfortable device to hold in your hand than the iPad 2. The iPad 2 had sharper edges which digged into your hands. But one disadvantage of this design is when you try and lie it flat on a surface, it will always rock because the back is convex. So now having a look at the front of this iPad, the bezels are actually very large, but they weren't any smaller with the iPad 2. This comes with the old school home button with a square, and there's also no camera at the top. This is the only iPad with no cameras at all. So having a look at the top of this device, it has a black plastic power button, and then on the other side it has a 3.5mm headphone jack with a microphone, I believe. On the left hand side of the device there isn't anything, it's just a smooth bit of aluminium. Then on the bottom of this device it has the old fashioned 32-pin data transfer power connector port, and then below that there is a speaker grill. Moving on to the right hand side of this device, there's a volume rocker at the top and a silent switch, which is very nice to see on an iPad. Then on the back of this device it just says iPad, and then the storage of this iPad, and then there's an Apple logo that is actually black plastic, so it's not shiny or reflective like some of the newer iPads. And there you go, that is the design of the iPad first generation. I just want to say this does feel like a very sturdy device. It doesn't feel like it's going to kind of break or wear. There's no flex in the chassis. Oh, I'm saying that and then just made a clicking sound. You hear that? Don't know what that is. The screen might be popping out, but it is 14 years old. So we're now going to have a look at the very limited software experience of this iPad first generation. So this is running iOS 5.1.1, which is the most up-to-date software you can actually install on this iPad. And that is the main problem with this iPad, is the software is very limited. So as you can see, this is all the pre-installed apps. You've got the pretty standard stuff, but you do have the old YouTube app. So if we click on that, try and load anything, yeah, you cannot connect to YouTube. This app is no longer supported, which is very annoying, and that goes for the App Store as well. So I've tried to install stuff without jailbreaking this device, and yeah, the App Store on this iOS is not supported, and that goes with iTunes as well. So you can't install any new apps, which is very unfortunate. It's basically only half a page of apps, and you can't install anything new, which means that this is a very limited device. A very basic version of multitasking, so you can open apps that were previously opened again through this, and then it has the screen brightness, rotation lock, and if you had any music playing through the music app you could skip tracks and change the volume using this feature. Yeah, but that's basically it. So let's have a look at the Maps app actually. As you can see, yeah, this actually still works fine, which is actually quite interesting. So yeah, that's pretty much it. That's the very limited software experience that you get from an iPad first generation in 2024. So yeah, that was a quick overview of the specs and hardware features of this iPad first generation. We're now going to take this outside and do a durability test to see how durable this iPad actually is. I did have the thought that this iPad might be worth something in a few years' time, but I don't think it is. I don't think this particular one's going to be worth very much. It does have quite a lot of scratching on the back where they've tried to remove an engravement. As far as software support, it's non-existent. You really can't do very much on this iPad, so the nicest thing to do with it is to try and destroy it. So, scenario, you've got your iPhone, it's going to take a FaceTime call with your iPad, got it up to your ear, and oh no, you end up dropping it. Do it again. So yeah, so after 2 drops from ear height onto some gravel, there is actually minimal damage. But I don't know if you can see, there is a little bit of scuffing. It's that corner. Dropped it face down onto some gravel, and we have actually put a little hairline crack down the front of the iPad, but that's actually all right. I don't know if you can see, but after that the back is pretty scuffed. A little bit dented, a little bit scuffed, but the iPad turns on. Touchscreen works fine. Pretty impressed with that actually. Let's carry on. So the iPad is actually quite dirty, so we're just going to rinse it off with the hose. There we go, it's a bit cleaner now. There's a bit of mud on the back. And yep, it's still working fine. Let's say you accidentally drop the iPad and then you accidentally walk on top of it and then jump. Oh, still working. This might be an indestructible device actually. So we're going to put the iPad under the front wheel of this car and we're going to run it over. Alright, so let's go and have a look to see what damage has been done after running over the iPad first generation with a car. Alright, yeah, that screen is completely totaled. But the screen looks a little bit destroyed. There is a small section though, let's put it in some better lighting. There is actually a section of the screen that's working. Oh, look at that, the touch screen's working on some of the screen. Not very well though. I also don't want to get glass in my fingers. So finally we're going to take an axe to the iPad to see if we can destroy it. There's a few colours coming through, but it does look like we've destroyed the screen. Let's see if we can destroy the back. So hopefully you enjoyed this video on this iPad first generation and durability test. If you did enjoy, be sure to hit that subscribe button. We're on the road to 2,000 subscribers, and I will see everyone in my next video.